Here in the UK, the public strongly supports a call by over 50 MPs and peers for restrictions to online gambling, according to new research today. A House of Commons committee recommends banning all gambling advertising, a £2 stake limit for online slot machines and tighter regulation of the industry. The survey was conducted for Clean Up Gambling, whose director, Matt Zarb-Cousin, is with us. He previously lobbied to reduce the maximum stake on fixed odds betting terminals from £100 to £2 a spin. Also with us, Kelly Field, who built up over £70,000 in debt gambling online. She started a gambling addiction recovery podcast called All Bets Are Off. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for talking to us. Kelly, I want to start with you, if I may. At the height of your addiction, how long would you be on gambling websites each day, and how much were you spending?
So initially, when I was off work, I would be sat on the computer for up to 8 hours a day, spending upwards of £500 a day, no questions asked, from the industry or from the banks.
So what kind of sums were you spending per spin?
Probably at the most sort of £40 to £60 a spin. Now you sort of could go up to £1,000 a spin on some of the slots online, but I was sort of £40 to £60 maximum a spin.
Right. And what effect was that having on you?
I had no end of on my mental health. It sort of ultimately made me suicidal. The debts, I lost friendships, I became lonely, I isolated myself. Depression, put weight on. Sort of no end of effects really.
And do you think some of the measures proposed in today's report would have stopped you from becoming so addicted and losing so much money?
I definitely think the £2 stake is very interesting, and if then I was only allowed to deposit £2 a spin, I think then the duty of care of the operators and the industry would have maybe have picked up on the length of time and the amount of time I would have been online to spend what I would have been spending. So I do think that definitely is sort of a positive thing. From 2014, I've been campaigning to have ads banned from online gambling, because I just think that the products that the industry are advertising are adult products. They're aimed at people 18 and over, and they should not be on TV before 9 p.m. And I just think, what other adult products would be advertised on TV before 9 p.m?
Matt, do you agree with that in terms of online gambling and the advertising?
I do agree with that, yeah, and overwhelmingly the public seems to agree as well that gambling advertising should not be directed at children, or children shouldn't be exposed to it at all. And I think what we've seen with this report and what it's picked up on is that we've got really outdated gambling laws. What underpins the 2005 Gambling Act, which is our current legislation, was a report written in 2001 by Sir Alan Budd. And that was when, if you were lucky enough, you were walking around with a Nokia 3210 in your pocket. And phones have changed considerably, and gambling has changed considerably in that time. Most gambling online is now done on a mobile. And the framework that we have to regulate products, land-based products like machines, and you touched on fixed odds betting terminals earlier, and the campaign to reduce the stake, simply doesn't apply to online stakes and prizes. And that makes no sense when you look at the framework. The framework is supposed to put the most addictive products and the most harmful products with the highest stakes in the least accessible venues. And we've got a situation where the most accessible products have, as Kelly said, £1,000 a spin. And really, this needs to be reviewed urgently, because these are really, really addictive products. No one chooses to get addicted. No one chooses to gamble, in a way that could be perceived as irresponsibly. This happens to people over time, and the products do bring that out and induce it. And I think it's so important that we have those controls on those products. As well as that, I think the advertising ban is something that really I think most people can get behind. We've got the return of the Premier League this week, and with it, a full return of advertising. So expecting, obviously a huge impact in that respect. And the other recommendations, such as affordability checks. Now, if you're gambling more than you can afford to lose, then that's a sign of addiction. So, I think it's so important that we get this right. And when the government does come to review the Gambling Act in September, which is what we're expecting. We're expecting them to announce the review in September, that all of these things are included, so we can have a proper debate about the future of gambling.
Okay. The gambling industry, as you know, contributes about 15 billion a year to the UK economy, and the companies pay levies which help fund treatment for those with addictions. Is that not enough?
Well, I don't think it contributes 15 billion to the economy. It makes 15 billion in profits a year, which is a very, very different thing. A lot of those profits go offshore to tax havens. So, I mean, I think it's a very different thing. And look, the levy that they've agreed to pay, the 100 million over a period of 4 years, I'm afraid it will barely scratch the surface. You're talking about, of the big 5 operators, you're talking about £5 million a year, which won't even cover the cost of treatment, I'm afraid. There needs to be a statutory levy of whatever the needs are, maybe 1%, paid to an independent commissioning body that can then commission treatment services and commission independent research. At the moment, we've got this ridiculous situation where the gambling industry voluntarily gives money to a charity and then they commission research, and the whole thing needs to be reviewed. It needs to be completely independent.
Okay.
And look, the gambling industry are going to push back on any reforms because it's going to hurt their profitability. It's going to hurt their bottom line, but they're not going to go bust. They're not going to go bankrupt because there's restrictions on stakes. This is a sector that makes £4 to £5 billion a year. And slots make £2.2 billion a year. It's crazy money.
Let me read this statement from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. We're absolutely committed to protecting people from the risks of gambling-related harm and recognise there's more to do. We have been clear that we will review the Gambling Act to ensure it is fit for the digital age. We've also worked closely with the Gambling Commission over the past 18 months to introduce a wave of tough measures, cutting the maximum stake on fixed odds betting terminals, introducing tighter age and identifying checks for online gambling, and banning gambling using credit cards across Britain.
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a lot. They've made progress, you could argue.
Certainly on fixed odds betting terminals, I completely agree. I obviously really welcome that, and obviously commend the Minister at the time, Tracy Crouch, for really pushing that through. And I think that they've obviously accepted that restrictions on products, restrictions on gambling products, such as limiting the stake, are an effective way of reducing harm. And I hope that they apply that principle now to online stakes and prizes. And I'm looking forward to the gambling review and hope this sorts a lot of these problems out, because this just seems to be a recurring theme. You have cases like Kelly's all the time coming up. And really what we want is a situation where we've got the right regulatory framework and the right laws to minimise harm, okay, and then we can just get on with it.
Let me go back to Kelly. I mean, people might have an image of a gambling addict being a guy who goes down to the bookies every day or whatever. In speaking to people on your podcast, could an addict be any one of us?
Yeah, an addict comes from any walk of life, any creed, any colour. It doesn't discriminate, male, female. And I think more worrying is that children are targeted, and the sort of statistics of children that are gambling is very, very worrying. And it's the next generation that I worry about, that we're normalising gambling to young people. With all singing, all dancing, the adverts. And I just think, we need to protect the next generation, and we need to do what we can to protect vulnerable people and young people from gambling harm.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly Field, former gambling addict, and Matt, thank you for your time. Matt Zarb-Cousin, Director of Clean Up Gambling.